Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk about the textural nightmare that is Bruckner's Third Symphony, and then some of the best recordings of its various versions. Now, basically, let's try and make this as simple as possible. There are three versions of the Bruckner Symphony. Three. Let's see if I can do that. Yes, three. The 1873 original, the 1877 revision, and the 1889 revision. There is also a stray Adagio hanging around out there for your delectation. And there's also an extra coda to the Scherzo that got attached later to the 1877 revision, which you may or may not hear, and it doesn't make any difference. So just forget about it and don't worry about it. It's either there or it's not. It's not a make or break issue. Now, the problem with the third was this. The original version was incredibly long and difficult. This was the one that had all the Wagner quotations and stuff in it, and it begins with the trumpet going da 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 da. Right, okay. That's the symphony's motto. We know all we need to know. It is the first great Bruckner symphony, the first one that we unquestionably identify as Bruckner, and it couldn't have been anybody else. But the third in its original version was grotesquely long. The only recommendable recording of it, I think, or the most recommendable, there's others that are pretty good. Eliyahu Inbal didn't suck, it was interesting. But the one to have is Tintner, Georg Tintner on Naxos. It's a fabulous, fabulous performance, and it lasts a good hour and 20 minutes, which is why the thing was never played in Bruckner's lifetime. He never heard it in its original form. All the way through, it was never performed that way, and he immediately set about revising it. This, of course, leads people to believe that out of faithfulness and devotion to the great misunderstood genius, we should be playing this original version. Nonsense. The original version is every way inferior to what he later did. There is no justification, frankly, for performing it in that form. Do we find it interesting? Yeah, okay. But as representative of his ultimate intentions for the symphony? No way. There is no difference, and this is what we need to understand. There is no difference between what Bruckner did with his scores and what any other composer did. They revised things. Bruckner revised things. He did it for a number of reasons. Aaron Copland in his Third Symphony revised the finale based on actual performance and consultation with Leonard Bernstein, and he fixed it. That's what composers do. This really has bearing on this. I once had a conversation with the great late Finnish composer Eino Juhani Rautavaara, and when we were in Helsinki, and I asked him straight out. I said, as a composer, when you hear your works, can you write a symphony without having heard it at all and know exactly what it's going to sound like? And what he said, he was the most honest and delightful human being that ever lived. He said, that's what we hope. I hope I do. But the fact of the matter is, he said, I'm only going to hear it a couple of times in my lifetime. Even if I attend performances, how many are there going to be? I may hear a broadcast. I may hear it live a couple times. And what you do is you write it. You hope you do what you intend to do. Then you hear it. And then you go and you fix it. And by then, sometimes your publisher has already published it, and they get annoyed with you because what they published is no longer valid, and they have to make corrections, and it's expensive, and sometimes they will, and sometimes they won't, and you just do the best you can. And that's the reality for every composer that ever lived, and Bruckner was no exception. You always go back and fix things. Mahler revised constantly. Dvorak revised. Brahms revised the slow movement of his First Symphony and made cuts. This is what they did, especially in the Romantic period, where there were always sort of conflicts between immediate emotional expression and broad lyrical melodies and the forms in which they were cast. And this was a particular issue with Bruckner. Now, one of the interesting things with Bruckner's Third Symphony in its original version is that it doesn't have the melodic interest that it later did. Bruckner's thinking, and this is something that it seems to me the Bruckner people don't ever address when they start justifying playing every edition of every symphony equally, is that Bruckner tended to think in blocks, and because he thought in blocks, he sort of sketched out or imagined his movements in terms of large harmonic space. And those spaces may or may not be filled with actual tunes. Sometimes it's just harmony. And the Third Symphony is particularly full of that. What you'll find if you compare the revised passages to the original is that he makes them more interesting. He makes them more interesting rhythmically. He makes them more interesting thematically. The harmony generally remains more or less the same. And so what he discovered, I believe, listening to these things comparatively over a long period of time, is that when he added the tunes, when he made these passages more melodically interesting, he found that they didn't need to be as long and that they didn't need to be repeated as frequently. Why? Because a tune, a melody, is instantly memorable. There was no longer an issue for the listener, for him, of emphasizing certain specific harmonic areas over others, because when they don't have identifying thematic material, then you have to linger longer. You have to stress them longer for them to have the same impact that they do when you simply write a tune that everybody remembers the second it returns. And this is often what happens in his revisions. If you listen to the opening, for example, of the Adagio, the main theme, originally, it's a sequence of harmonies. It sort of meanders on, but then by 1877, he's actually achieved a sequence. It's a motive, really. It's ya da 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 da. It sounds like "Make Someone Happy" from the musical Do Re Mi. Ya da 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 da. Ya da. It does that stuff, but it's memorable. It's a tune. It's acquired a profile and an identity. And when his themes acquire that kind of profile and identity, then they don't need to be repeated as often. And that, I think, is the basis for a lot of the kinds of revisions that Bruckner did more or less on his own. Now, the version that ought to be played is the 1877 version. That is Bruckner's ideal form of the work. And we know that because in his bequest to the Imperial Library when he was dying in his will, that was the version whose finale he included in the package. He could not include the first three movements. And the reason he couldn't include the first three movements is because he didn't have them. Mahler had them. Mahler made the piano score of the 1877 version, and Mahler kept them. They were one of his prized possessions. So Bruckner had no choice. He could only include the finale. There is a possibility that Bruckner wanted that finale only to be the finale, and that he accepted the revisions to the 1889 version that he later made with his helpers, the Schock brothers, Franz Schock in particular. But the reason that Bruckner, would have done it that way is because Schock wanted Bruckner to make cuts in the finale and made sure it was published with those cuts, which Bruckner accepted. We don't know with, how grudgingly. My thinking is that he probably ultimately rejected them, but he was okay with the first three movements because he revised them himself without Schock. So it's possible that you could do the 1889 first three movements with the 1877 finale. But of course, that will never be published that way because the Bruckner people believe that you can't ever mix editions, even if they all come from Bruckner and would be authorized by him. And there would be nothing wrong with doing it that way, quite frankly. I could see that happening, and it would be very successful. But the 1889 version, which is the one we usually hear, the last version, is the shortest, and it's the one that everybody gets sort of upset about in the finale because it lacks the first thematic group and the recapitulation. It skips right to the second subject. I don't think it matters that much. I really don't, because as I said, Bruckner's music is chunky. It comes in these sound blocks, and you can sort of mix them and match them as you see fit, on the way to the ending. It's not a tragedy. But the 1877 version had his sanction as the one that was actually performed disastrously, and it also is the one that he bequeathed to the Imperial Library. And that bequest is very, very important because although the Bruckner scholarship has done its best to try and make a complete mess out of what he wanted or didn't want or authorized or what happened on the day or who did what and how and who, and it's just a mess of illogic and bad scholarship. It really is. But the bottom line is that we know what Bruckner wanted in most cases. There are a couple questionable ones. The First Symphony, for example, we know he preferred the Vienna version, but everyone else likes Linz. That may be a case where we should override the composer's wishes. But there doesn't seem to be any question that he liked the finale of the 1877 third and probably would have liked the rest of the 1877 third had it been available. It was the one that he ultimately revised and wanted to be performed. Now, the 1889 version was performed quite successfully, finally, and he was very happy about that. So that has its claims as well. But if your argument is that we want to hear Bruckner at his early best in the Third Symphony, then the one to play is not the original version, which was really an unperformed draft more than anything else. It is the 1877 version, and that's the one I'm going to be talking the most about. Now, if you're looking for recordings of 1889, that's the one you're going to hear most of the time. And for that, the choices are really very simple. It's all the usual culprits. There's Karl Böhm with the Vienna Philharmonic. There's Günter Wand in Cologne. There's Skrovichevsky, who's terrific at all of these things. And there's Joachim, who's absolutely fabulously wonderful with the Staatskapelle Dresden, and that's the one I'd probably recommend. Most people do other versions, will be 1889, and that's what you can have. I mean, those are your choices. And, in a pinch, it's not the biggest tragedy. It really isn't. It's okay either way. Now, the other issue that really makes the people care about a lot in discussing the different editions is the Adagio. The Adagio is one of those pieces. It's in Bruckner's normal Adagio form, which wasn't as normal as people think it is, but that's A, B, A, B, A, 5 parts, with these 2 alternating tunes based on Beethoven's Ninth. In 1889, he chopped it down to ABA. In 1877, it's still in its more or less original form, although he deleted some sections. I'm not going to get into the details. It's longer in 1877 and very beautiful. The actual form of the work, although it's AB, ABA, it's not how you hear it, because the B section is so long and so varied that you actually hear it as 2 separate independent units. And so it was sort of ABC, ABC, A. And so what Bruckner was able to do with these different sections is what he did in his quicker movements. He could leave some out or attach some in different ways, and that's what he did. And it's beautiful either way. Doesn't make any difference as far as I'm concerned. In terms of formal balance, the best one probably is the last one, 1889, which really is sort of an ABA, nice shape. But that's an argument for another time as well. Let's talk about recordings of the 1877 version. There are a bunch of them, fortunately. Not as many, not dozens like you find of the New World Symphony, but there are 7 or 8 here, I think, that will do you. First, Johannes Wildner with the New Philharmonic Orchestra of Westphalia. Not one of your great ensembles, but they play very well. And in this recording, this Naxos version, you get both the 1877 and 1889 versions and the spare Adagio from 1876, which will prove to you once and for all that 1877 is better. I guarantee it. So, but this way, actually, you can hear all 3 different forms that the Adagio eventually took. So, if that's exciting to you, then knock yourself out. All right. Next, we come to Haitink. Now, Haitink always did a great Bruckner third. His first recording, which this is with the Concertgebouw, used the Ozer edition, which is 1877 without the coda to the Scherzo. That's basically the difference. He remade it excellently in Vienna, also for Philips, now Decca, a recording that's sort of out of print and hard to get, where I think you can download it. I think I downloaded it actually, but it's the Haitink Bruckners are sort of in limbo, except for this new Bluetooth Blu-ray, whatever it's the blue thing. It's blue, you see, the blue reissue of number 3 in the Ozer edition, but he used the later critical edition, which, by the way, is this one. I have all of them. Here they are. You can get all of them in handy pocket scores, so you can mix and match and compare and just have a Bruckner 3 orgasm if that's where you're, getting your kicks. Anyway, so there's the Haitink, and he does the 1877 version with or without the coda to the Scherzo, depending on which one you get. Next, Sinopoli, some of whose Bruckner was dreadful, but the third in the 1877 version was the first one he did, and it was one of the first recordings, I think, of the full 1877 version, and it's thrilling with the Staatskapelle Dresden. It's great. It's fabulous. See if you can get it separately. You don't want to hear all the rest of his Bruckner. Then, Harnoncourt, another great performance with the Vienna Philharmonic, or is this one with the Concertgebouw? I'm trying to think. Let's see. Concertgebouw with this one. Goodness, it's 3 different orchestras. Hang on. I'm going to check, just to be absolutely clear, so that I'm not driving you crazy. Yes, it is the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra. It's a great Bruckner third. Some of his were done in Vienna, some in Berlin. Anyway, this is terrific. 1877. You can't go wrong. It's very exciting. Harnoncourt's Bruckner, except for the 8th for some reason, which was a mess, was generally swift and lean and really, really quite exciting. Next, we have Barenboim's. 2 of them. The first one with Chicago is generally better than his second one with Berlin, but the third is one of the better recordings in his Berlin cycle, which was really kind of uninteresting for the most part. He uses the Ozer edition without the coda to the Scherzo. We don't care. Either performance is excellent. You're in business. Now, my ultimate recommendation, and this one may surprise you because I'm generally not a fan of his, but Schulte, he was great in early Bruckner. His later Bruckner, not so interesting sometimes, but my God, does he do early Bruckner like a demon. It's exciting. It's fast. It's furious. The orchestra plays the daylights out of the music. It's absolutely wonderful. So if you're looking for a Bruckner third in the 1877 version, and I'm also going to recommend some other of these early ones later on when we talk about the other early symphonies, Schulte could surprise you. He really could. In the War Horses, sometimes he was disappointing, but when he took a piece like this and just gave it the treatment, and it is a thriller from first note to last. So that's my recommendation for the 1877 Bruckner third. That's the version you should own. Don't let anybody else tell you otherwise. If you're curious because it's all been recorded, by all means, check them out. Have fun. Keep on listening, guys. Thank you.